Okay, good afternoon, Paul. It's nice having you. Welcome to Krakow. I want to introduce everyone Paul Papadimitriou. He's probably one of the most well-versed persons I know. Been traveling all around the place. You've been living in many different countries, including the Philippines, including Japan.
Yes.
You work right now at Constellation Research, which is a very interesting company with people all over the world, including the US. So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how do you see things, like comparing both sides, the Asian market and the Europe market, specifically the Eastern European market and in Poland. How are you seeing, what are the main differences you're seeing between the e-commerce here in places like Poland and in Japan, for example?
Well, Japan is a totally different world. You'd have the exact same type of website you'd find here, meaning your auction websites, your e-commerce websites are existing as well. There's no much difference in that, but the names would be different. It would not be the names you know, and the type of behaviors would be different. But in terms of what we can learn in Europe and also in the US about Japan is especially on the mobile front. Obviously, everybody knows that Japan is a very mobile-centric country, and a lot of commerce is actually happening on mobile phones for many reasons. I'm not going to delve into them too much, but in the end, if you think about it, you have your mobile with you all the time. If you have your mobile all the time, you can have this. You can tap into the impulse behavior of people. I want to buy something, but I want to buy it now. Whereas if you use a website, oh, I want to buy something, I have to think about buying that later on when I get home. I open my computer, maybe by then, because impulse is also a behavioral structure in your mind that you really want something at some point, and then over time you might think twice and say, I'm not really wanting it anymore. So it's less of an opportunity for e-businesses. So if you move part of your operations to mobile, you can tap into this behavior. And now the markets both in Europe and the US is becoming ready. There's a joke in the industry that this year is the year of mobile. We've been saying that since like the end of the 90s. We're actually reaching that point where people start to have smartphones that are more powerful than computers you have at home. So you can do a lot of things on it. You can search, you can read, but you can also shop. And you see trends happening in Europe that are trends that happened in Japan a few years ago of tests about how can we sell things directly on mobile. And I think this is the biggest lesson you can learn about Japan is transferring from a world of desktops to a world of phones.
So you've been coming to Poland for a year now, so you've been traveling all around Poland, and we know the Polish market is very tech-driven, okay, and this is a general trend in Eastern Europe. So how do you think companies here in Poland should approach this? Because they probably have a lot of strengths when it comes to building algorithms, when it comes to building recommendation engines and all the backend that goes behind e-commerce. You know, what would be your advice in terms of, if we're trying to reach that, what you were talking about, what's happening in Japan, is how you can actually apply the knowledge they have here to achieve that?
I think there's still a gap between what we have here in Poland or in Eastern Europe and what we have in Japan, just because not everybody has a smartphone, for instance. It's still in terms of, if you sell something, if you're an e-business, you have to first learn about your demographics. Who does what with what? Who has a phone? Who has a PC? What is your age? This is every normal business to do that. And if you look at the numbers, of course, in Eastern Europe and in Poland, we haven't reached the numbers that they have in Japan or in other maybe less more in some parts of Western Europe. So, in light of that, the strategy should not be to try to be Japan now. The strategy should be, how do we fill the gap between this we are now and the future, which might be in 2-3 years. And I talk a lot about experiences. Maybe you cannot do all your shopping on mobile phone, for instance, but you know that some people have mobile phones, so you can create an experience that's seamless. I go to a website, to your e-business website, because I'm searching for something. So I'm searching on Google or another search engine, and I end up on your website. The website is made for mobile, so I only have the relevant information. When someone is on mobile, this is consumer behavior. When you're on mobile, you have a very short attention span. You're not staying for hours in front of your mobile. It's not when you shop on an e-commerce website, for instance, on your desktop. You might. I can see friends of mine staying for 2 or 3 hours going through all the different, for instance, clothes and etc. On the mobile phone, you don't have that kind of attention span. So websites should not only be for the size of the screen of the mobile, but it should only be about the behavior of the user at that point, which is a very short time to be spent on that site. But in light of that, you know that not everybody has a smartphone. We can still create the beginning of the shopping experience there. So I want to buy, let's say I want to buy shoes. I'm searching for these shoes on my phone because I just seen them in an ad on the bus. I see the shoe, as the first link or the second link on Google brings me to that e-commerce site. Maybe I won't do the buy on that mobile e-commerce site, but I have enough information. I can, for instance, press a button and I say save for later. There's actually a website, there's a Hipmunk. Hipmunk does that. Hipmunk is a airline price search engine. So they aggregate all the prices, you know, when you want to buy a ticket. You can do that on mobile, but that's the other interesting thing about consumer behavior is the price point. You might buy something on a mobile phone for $5 or €5. You might not buy something for €1,000 on a mobile phone because you don't feel comfortable. You need more time to reflect. But you can still search for the airline ticket. Say, oh, this ticket costs €1,000. You're not sure you want to buy it, but you press that button, you save it for later, and when you go at home or at work on the big screen of your computer, the beginning of that funnel, the shopping funnel was already done. You have it. You just open the computer and say, oh, this is a ticket I wanted like 2 hours before. Oh, actually, I might buy it, and then you buy it. So you can still. This is the gap. You can still bring people. Use whatever you have. I mean, not everybody will buy on mobile, but use whatever behavior they have and transfer them to a later experience on a desktop. So this is what they can do, for instance, in Eastern Europe.
So it's interesting then, because you're essentially saying that we shouldn't follow blindly what's going on in Japan. It's a very different culture, it's a very different background, and so it would be interesting to see, because you're talking about this digital bridge between the dumb phones, you know, and the smartphones, and the smartphone penetration within the markets in Eastern Europe. What can we do? What are the steps, or what are the major drives for this growth of smartphones? Because the drives in Japan are very different to the drives in Europe. So what are the drives that companies should be focusing on to try and bridge that gap here in Europe?
I think, first of all, it's inevitable. I mean, the rise of smartphones will happen anyway. The fact that the Android OS is free makes it that you will find more and more sub €100 smartphones. This is the problem, and the price point is a problem. This is why right now we still don't have as much acceptance. Is that an iPhone is still very expensive. Okay, an iPhone can be subsidized. Android phone is as well. If you're talking about Samsung, these are very great phones, but very expensive. It's almost €1,000 for a phone. Not everybody can afford that. You tie in the subsidy of the operator. Sometimes you can go to 200, even less and less. But still, the price point is still high. I think the first thing that will happen, and we're seeing that happening in Asia already, and I'm not talking Japan, I'm talking emerging countries. I was living in the Philippines, as you said before. You can see these are the smartphones that will be used by the market because they're very low price point, so they can actually be bought by people that really want a smartphone, but they cannot afford a bigger one. So this is what is going to happen first, and this is not something that e-businesses themselves can do. I think this is something that carriers will obviously have a say. In Japan, the feature phones, which were not smartphones, were so successful because Docomo, which is the biggest carrier in Japan, decided so, basically, in a nutshell. So it was infrastructure, then created all the opportunities for vendors or the opportunities for e-businesses. You cannot go without the infrastructure. So I think here in Eastern Europe, it will be the role of operators, the competition between them that will entice this growth, but this growth is inevitable. Smartphones, I believe, even in Eastern Europe, will be prevalent in the next 2 or 3 years anyway.
Okay, Paul, well, thank you very much for joining us today, and definitely enjoy the rest of your time in Poland.
Thank you.